I'll try to serve this panel by bridging my experience between 30 years spent on the TradFi or traditional banking side and another 8 years in fintech, and try to bring these together, and hopefully we can create a little bit of a joust here. So I'll make a premise that firstly, to the question, are banks becoming tech companies? The premise would be that banks have always been tech companies. This will age me a little bit. In 1996, I joined a bank called State Street Bank, and we had one of the richest data sets in history with $15 trillion in custodied assets, and we'd provide insights to our client investors every day. Our US investors buying Japanese bonds, and are the Japanese selling European equities. And so we just processed stacks of diskettes, and that was big data, and that was 1997. A couple years later, we launched the first system to transact foreign exchange, and it was the first system that aggregated the sell side to the benefit of the buy side, much like what you have been doing at Nesto, Malik. And so this was 1999. And today, major banks like mine at Scotiabank and others have systems that transact enormous quantities of transactions per second, direct millions of customer payments per day, prevent millions of cyber breaches per week, and perform countless fraud and compliance checks to protect its client base's money. The banks also support the fintech industry through investments and partnerships, although that has had varying levels of intimacy. Banks have been built on a promise of trust with systems that are designed for robustness, for safety, for dependency and scale. They're heavily regulated into safety and dependability. In a paradoxical way, though, the banks have made big efforts and great progress in bundling products and services, despite the fact that their systems have been built or acquired in silos. The system stacks and the product silos have softened, but they remain in place today. With the banks implementing collaborative measures, we see things like information sharing mechanisms like CRM. We also have client experience unifiers like financial planning. And all this serves to deliver progressive, holistic client offering. But these are largely overlay measures, and the successful providers are really the ones that have managed to obviate or hide the seams in the service fabric for their clients. That is far from universal still today. In a world where barriers have been flattened by cloud computing and APIs providing real-time connectivity, tech companies, and in our case fintech, have brought simplicity, delight, and speed to narrower end-to-end client journeys. The industry has unbundled to rebuild. It's been powered by small challengers, unburdened by either legacy systems and often by regulation. Where banks are pouring an outsized portion of their investment into operational and regulatory controls, the fintechs are picking narrower customer journeys, and they're dedicating most of their investment on experience, or they're crafting regulatory first mover advantage by challenging the way that we do business. As the unbundling led to accelerated evolution, we're now rebundling, and ecosystems are now the objective to gain dominance of the end-to-end client relationship. So with agility, transversal connectivity, and simpler journeys, the fintechs are no longer playing on the edges. The industry is now a more intricate, a multi-layered battlefield for who will retain the client relationship, who will control influence the rails and pipes, who will have the trust and earned right to aggregate services. And mostly, there's going to be a strong reshaping of culture through all this. So let me open up to the panelists. Thank you for being here today. So maybe open question, how do you see financial services evolving now that the ecosystem is richer, more modular, and more interconnected? Ellen, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, no, I can kick us off. Ellen Lenardi, very happy to be here. Part of Synctera, I lead product and technology there, and I think it's been really interesting to see how both the bank is responding to all the technology innovation and how fintech are jumping in, right? Because I think it's in some ways an unnatural union where the fintechs are trying to move very quickly and the bank are trying to innovate, but in a much more, I would say, like regulatory bounded and slow way, right? Like, so just for context, if you guys don't know what Synctera does, we basically help banks launch embedded banking and finance. So we literally live in this intersection of bringing banking services to fintech. And what we see is fintech trying to understand banking and to understand why it needs to move at the pace that it does, because they're used to just really optimizing for client experience, the fastest, most seamless way to bring customer in. But I think we're seeing a nice dynamic pull between the two, and I feel like we are getting to the point where it's becoming a requirement for both the fintech to work with the banks and vice versa, right? Because consumer at the end of the day are going to expect a certain kind of compliance, regulatory, and trust that many of this fintech can't guarantee or have failed before. And I think that's some of the trend that's happened the last couple of years, is there's been a lot of launch quickly and then fail. And at the same time, we've seen banks trying to innovate, but in a pace that potentially when you build everything on your own does not match a lot of the market and industry stuff that's going on, right? And I'm sure we'll talk about things like stablecoin that's like heavily disrupting even the banking system, right? It almost revolve outside of that. So I think it's becoming a requirement for both the bank and the fintech to actually collaborate and be able to solve both the consumer and business problem, which is at the end of the day what all of us are here to do, right?
I think there's been a mind shift over the last 10 years. So I've been in building companies for the last 25 years now. So there was a few mind shift that I've seen, and one mind shift that I've observed with the financial institution in Canada is 7-10 years ago. It was really much like, how can I build and own everything in the future, because it needs to be mine, it's Word the Bank and so on. I think over the last 3 to 4 years, there was really that evolution where banks see way more partnership. Because de facto, fintech, they need to partner with banks. For example, we use the rail of Scotia, you might not know that, to collect the payment of our mortgages. We do need bank accounts. There's already a big partnership between fintech and banks.
And those partnerships seem to be extending now beyond fintech, right? So Patrick, you've had an interesting forum to play in, right? You start with travel and then end up with a whole kind of turn in your business that's actually quite powerful. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. I'm Patrick. I'm from Hopper. You may wonder, we're a travel company. What are we doing here? We are locally grown in Montreal, so been a great success story here. But we did start, when I joined Hopper 12 years ago, we were a traditional OTA trying to sell travel on a mobile phone. We still do that, but 90% of our business today is through our HTS, Hopper Technology Solutions business. Where we've really discovered that what we're good at, because we collect all of this data about travel and travelers, not just from our own customers, but from travel search around the world, is that we can leverage that to create new optionality for travelers. So helping bridge the gap between how suppliers want to sell travel, how customers want to buy it, as well as enabling partners who are non-traditional sellers of travel, like banks. We work with Capital One, with Lloyds Bank, SMCC in Japan, Nubank in Latin America. I think we're exposed to almost 500 million cardholders through banks that want to sell travel to their own customers. They want to have this broader relationship, and we can help them do that, both selling traditional travel products, but also these ancillary fintech products that we've created. So I think we've gone on an interesting kind of parallel journey from a traditional travel company like a bank to something that's more like a fintech company now.
And Patrick, what has that done to your business in many ways? Like I'm sure now your mix of revenues have changed a lot from the inception, right?
Yeah, so I think that it's interesting. The last time I was in this room was 2019, I want to say, our holiday party just before COVID. And that was a scary time for a travel company, right? Our travel revenue dropped 95% on March 20th after our best day of sales ever. And what do we do now, right? So it really encouraged us to understand, how can we add value to people who still wanted to travel? You don't make a lot of money selling flights or hotels, somebody else's supply. So we created these add-ons which give additional flexibility to customers. So if you want to protect yourself from risk of disruption or delay, we'll sell you an option that will cover you for that, right? If you want to book a non-refundable flight, we work with companies like Air Canada, many other airlines. We will sell you an option that allows you to ask for your money back, right? We'll also do it in reverse. If you book a hotel that's completely refundable, we'll offer you a discount in exchange for some of your refundability, so that if you do cancel, we'll keep some of the refund. So again, it's making customers happy. They get optionality that they want, so they're more likely to book. The suppliers are happy because more travel gets sold. And if we price correctly, we're happy because we make a little bit of money on the arbitrage.
Great. So if we compare maybe the banks and the fintechs ecosystem with what's happening in blockchain and the crypto world, layer ones, layer twos, do the layer twos only sit on top of layer one pipes, or do the layer ones and layer twos meld, and who owns the client and who aggregates and all? Maybe how do you see this parallel, and do you see this evolution, and how do you think that's going to now play out? Maybe Julien, I don't know.
Yeah, so Julien, I work for National Bank of Canada. I'll assume everybody knows what National Bank is, so I'll save us a few minutes. If you don't, there's always your favorite AI for it. So yeah, I mean, if you're looking at it from an infrastructure and networking perspective, right? So you have this pipe story there, where you have the foundation like Bitcoin on level 1 and or layer 1, and you have all the accelerators on layer 2. I don't know how the future is going to play out, but the way I see it, what you see everywhere in tech, and I think it's the same in finance, is that nobody wants to have to deal with 15, 20, 25 applications that are doing the same thing, right, or that are doing similar things. People want to have a seamless financial experience, not spend too much time taking care of their finances. They want it to be efficient, most people. So I do think that the role of integrator remains really, really relevant. And I'm sure that some fintechs will eventually grow into these kind of integrators, but I think there's a role for bank to play as well in that integration, in playing the role of a single point of contact, where it's easier for a client who doesn't want to spend hours and hours navigating through different applications, getting their finance done, right? Getting wealthier and so on. So this is a little bit how I would look at it.
Right. Even relevant to those who are developing products on the fintech side, owning the development, owning the product, therefore makes you own the client experience, is kind of like pretty core to what we worry about, right? So do the banks or the fintechs, do you have to own everything? Do you have to build everything? Or can you rely on partnerships to have an ecosystem that serves your interests and your customers well? Maybe Malik, I don't know if...
Yes. So maybe a quick story. 7 years ago, actually, we launched Nesto kind of 7 years ago here at the FinTech Forum. We've done the pitch and the startup pitch. We won the public prize. I still have the check with me. It paid for the Christmas event. But 7 years ago, we did talk with all the banks and ask, can we partner? We're about to build that technology. We could white label it to you. They all said, no, you're too small. We're already building that. Like I said, there was a mind shift, and now today, we are white labeling our technology to multiple financial institutions across Canada, a bit like Upper does on the travel side. And the notion of the ecosystem is creates value for the customer, because we've been obsessing for 7 years. How can we build the best mortgage experience from a digital and employee perspective for the future? And we've been only focused about that. And what we found is many years later, the banks want to bring that same level of quality of experience to their clientele, and I see tremendous benefit to partnering, because Nesto is for a certain segment in the market. There's all the banks that have different type of segments, and by no means I'm thinking we should serve all mortgages in Canada directly, but if I can be helpful with any financial institution, I think it's a great way to partner. And we see this working now.
That said, when I was at Wealthsimple, I found that the B2B customers were the most difficult because everybody wanted, the way that they were asking products to be developed and client experiences to unfold was almost like, can you be our dev shop?
Yeah.
Right? As opposed to, can we work together in something that has some measure of standardization, right? How do you deal with this demand? So you'll have multiple providers, multiple banks coming with different asks about what flavor the client experience should feel like. How do you deal with that?
So I think it's interesting. I think most of the financial institutions now have a PDST based on customizing software that they cannot support in the future. And many of them, they come to us and say, I don't want to customize. I want to make sure I evolve with your platform so I avoid. So I think timing is everything. I think the timing is good now because they do understand that they don't want a dev shop. They want to have the best product that they can provide to their customers.
So that's a pretty positive evolution for the entire industry then.
Yes.
Yeah.
No.
Awesome. Do you believe AI will play an accelerating role in shaping financial services and the potential partnerships between companies like that we represent? Julien, do you want to start on that?
Yeah. So one thing I didn't mention is that I work in AI at the bank, right? So you can expect that my answer to the question will be yes, and it actually is. And I've been working in AI for quite a while because I believe that it's quite a game changer. Whether you're looking at back office, middle office, front office processes, revenue generation, cost optimization, risk management. I mean, I see today opportunities with AI everywhere. Doesn't mean that it's easy to get the outcome out of it that you hope, right? It's not always that much of a simple technology to get to work and get the ROI you want, but the ROI is there when you manage to do that hard work. If I look at the bank, for instance, I mean, we already have a pretty big impact on our financial performance from AI. And I think that's just going to grow in the future. And I think, when you look at how things are going to play out, there's so much potential with AI to go beyond what more classical rule-based approach will do that I don't really see any area of finance that should not be affected by it in the future. Again, doesn't mean it's going to be easy, right? But I think there's huge potential for AI to be pretty much everywhere. Now, to your question of is this going to have an impact on the relationship with fintechs or between banks and fintechs, I do think so. I'm seeing more and more fintechs that are bringing AI products, but typically AI is not, plug and play to deploy in various environments with various data. So I think this might actually be a facilitator, something encouraging, building these relationships, continuing to build them between fintechs and banks. And I mean, fintechs have demonstrated their capacity to innovate so much faster, consistently, right? So I think it's not an option, right? We had a false fire alarm a couple of minutes ago that we all went through. There's a real fire alarm around innovation. There's real competition. It's not an option. Like, this needs to be done. And I don't think banks have the option of doing everything themselves. I think they need to work with fintech for some of the things they want to accomplish.
So how do they get there? What's the biggest? So we have clear examples, as Malik was explaining, but what do you think is the biggest thing that needs to change within the traditional financial circle for this to evolve at a quicker pace? To Alan's comment at the beginning.
That's a pretty good question, right? What I'm seeing today is technology that is evolving faster than the capacity of the average person to absorb. And if you look at bank as integrators, this is a big challenge, right? Because you want to remain competitive, you got to have the latest technology, the best experiences, but you need to be able to follow that incredible speed of technology evolution, right? So I would tell you that I think if I look at AI, I would say AI literacy, but if I scale that up to everything that's technology-oriented, I would say technology literacy is going to be a foundation for this evolution of the banking sector and of that collaboration between fintechs. Like, if I have to choose one thing, this is where I would go.
And this comes in the form of knowledge or culture mostly, What do you think?
I would say culture first, but knowledge is somewhere in there, definitely.
Yeah.
I saw you smile, Ellen.
So my background before I ever enter finance or banking or any of those was actually building product first and foremost, right? And it was actually really interesting when I first came into finance, payment side, was that I first met a lot of PMs that came into the ecosystem. I was at Intuit for about 11 years, a company very obsessed with customer journey and experience. And you realize that within the financial industry, a lot of us have sort of kind of grow up program managing around processes and delivery of services, right? And I think the one thing that a lot of fintechs are doing and so critical, whether we're talking about layer 1, layer 2, which layer you want to own, or AI, is actually problem solving and ensuring that whatever technology we're deploying, right, whether that's API layer, user experience on travel, right, or mortgage, focusing on the end user problem, what they're trying to do, and ensuring that the solution is grounded around that is so important. So in a lot of ways, it's actually thinking about all the services, the orchestration, the platform that we're deploying as a product, which means you have to understand who the end users are, what their problem statements are, and that's surprisingly hard, especially if we're trying to do this within an organization that's traditionally been delivering services, highly regulated, the mindset is different, technology approach is different, even your starting point on thinking about the problem is different, right? And we see this a lot because we facilitate kind of, like I said, the connectivity between banks and fintech. You get fintech coming in, hey, we want to problem solve on this particular area. And the banks tends to start from a slightly different point of view and say, this is what we can do, what we can't do. And I do believe one of the most important evolution is to, again, anchor back of thinking about the service and everything that we do as a product to the end user. Because at the end of the day, and we saw this a lot on what COVID did, right? It changed the expectation for consumer and businesses on how they interact with each other and how they interact with financial services. So the bar is really raised, and I think that means all of us, right, need to kind of, bank included, need to reorient the thinking to accommodate AI or crypto or anything else around solving customer jobs first.
And that's super interesting, Ellen. I really like your point on the product view. I think maybe in banking, if we look at the past, maybe we used to look at product development as, let's focus on stability, reliability, and sometimes that might look a little bit backward looking. Yeah. And today, I don't think product owners in banks have an option but to be forward-looking, looking at how they can transform their offering, how they can include the offering at fintechs to make it work, right? So that whole notion, of thinking of innovation as a lab that sits somewhere in an organization, like at the 5th basement, very, very far from the operations, I think this doesn't work anymore.
Yeah.
I think when we talk about a culture change, your product people have to be forward-looking and see, yes, keep the product stable, right? You want your payments to work when you're going to buy your beer bottles, but you also need to look at how this is going to evolve through time, and you got to balance both.
Mm-hmm. The way I've internalized that as well is, and I think the banker of tomorrow and the fintech worker of today or the product developer of today is can you think outside in as opposed to project inside out? And that to me is going to be the biggest cultural challenge that we're going to have. There's still a lot of assumptions-based product development happening in the industry, and I think we have to challenge that a lot, all of us. Right?
Just maybe to add to that and go back to your first question a little bit. I think having gone through this transformation ourselves from owning the entire customer relationship to now owning a little slice of it, I think two things that are really important with this shift towards AI is first, I think the focus on crafting these user interfaces is going to change completely, right? I think we've spent a long time historically trying to build interfaces for humans to talk to databases through pointing and clicking, and AI is providing this kind of universal interface for that, so I think it'll completely change how we think about that. The other thing that I see, again, is the data underlying that customer experience. When we run our own travel app, we see everything you do, right? We know a lot about what you've been looking at, what you're trying to buy. I think it's the same with banks integrating our fintech, right? There's this kind of tension between who actually owns this customer data now, right? Do you actually see the breadth of the relationship as your customers dive into different silos that are run by different providers, and how do you actually provide a coherent interaction with them across those different touch points. And for me, that's the other big thing that AI is going to do, is just magnify the importance of the underlying data, like actually having the data and having unique data that is not inside ChatGPT, right? That's valuable, right? And we see that at Hopper. We collect billions of airfare transactions every day, right? And that's a language of pricing flights and hotels, which becomes part of our moat. And I think that's an interesting thing that banks and fintech providers are going to need to think about. You know, who actually owns that? Who can leverage it to provide something unique?
So if we go a little bit deeper on that topic, data, data organization was the task of, the central task forever. Then you start seeing, the providers that are creating more ability to travel across unstructured data and to visualize data, snowflakes and the Databricks and all that stuff. You have tableaus and all that stuff working on top of each other. Data is now easier to access in a disorganized way. AI is going to use reams of data that now need a little bit less of that organization. Is AI now going to change the power balance between the innovators and the kind of the traditional, robust pipe providers, in that the organization of data is now less of an imperative, and it's the how do you generate insights and all that? Do you want to dig into that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, at least for me, I think the key thing is less about organizing the data and more about who actually owns the data and who has access to it and what's the quality of it, right? Like, I think as a customer, you're going to start having higher and higher expectations about, I'm working with this bank, they're selling me 100 different things. They should know what I'm doing in all these different channels and be consistent with how they interact with me. But I think if you don't actually own that underlying data, how do you do that, right? And I think that's the thing that's going to change, is it's leveraging the kind of the value that's generated from the underlying data that you own.
In some ways, though, the industry's evolved in a much more conservative way, right? We had, firm silos established between operating units, and so it was hard by design to know a customer holistically, because there was this understanding of, the legitimacy of transferring data from one part of the organization to the other. I think it's evident to all of us that we're sharing more data more openly, more courageously than we ever have. And the next generation is putting everything out there and implicitly agreeing to data handling agreements that are pretty bold. How do we see that evolving, and how does that, are we now able to have a completely holistic experience by definition now, and do we need that?
Well, at least for me, again, I don't think you're automatically going to get it, but I think customers are going to expect it, right? Like, I'm already frustrated when I call my bank and they ask me for my account details every time I get transferred. Or, we're spending a lot of time on service with our travel customers, and they expect when they call us that, we know what they've booked and what their plans are, and they don't want us to ask, and I think that's just going to increase with AI, right?
So we're still behind we're behind the curve on what people expect us to deliver.
Oh yeah, I think way behind. Yeah.
I think we just heard the alarm today, and I think the financial institution especially needs to do much bolder things, because yes, we have access to data. But can you action that data? That's the biggest problem that I see right now is, for example, for a mortgage system, when we go in, we would see that they would use 22 different mortgage system to provide one mortgage. They all have their own set of data. Yes. They cannot action it. So we're far from AI. We just need to be able to provide the service. And you talked at the beginning, the big data was 97, you said, I believe. Well, we still need to deliver on this, because having unified data, I think, will enable us to be better.
I do think that, it's a balance as well, though, right? Like, while consumers are very willing to share all their information about yourself, post every videos of everything that you're doing, when it comes to financial information, I do actually think this is where a financial institution has an advantage, right? The trust still matters. Those information and who you give it to fundamentally still matters. The problem that I've seen with a lot of like financial institutions, because they've kind of accumulated a lot of technology internally, snowflakes, anything else, they're as good as the data is normalized, right? So what we've actually seen a lot of with the banks that we work with is they have a ton of data. You just don't know what to do with it because they're not normalized, right? Like you could work with different processor. Everyone sends you a different file. You're like, there's 50 versions of settlement files, right? Like, and so it becomes this massive burden of you pay for the hosting of all the data, but you can't necessarily use it. When I think financial institution actually is in a unique place where consumer and business will trust you, right? And so sometimes if you work with a fintech and they know too much about you, it's creepy. But when your bank knows something about you, you're like, that's awesome. The problem is I think there's a mismatch on the technology curve adoption and the ability to actually do something useful with the information between FI and fintech. And I think that is the opportunity. So,
Yeah.
So how do you do that? Pardon me, Joe, Jay.
Yeah. But, I mean, everybody's chipping in, so I kind of feel the pressure to chip in as well. I mean, just quickly, going towards open banking and open architectures, right? I think this makes the client regain ownership of the data. That whole process is going in that direction. I'm not saying we're there yet, but this is where we're going, right? And the reality is that no data is perfect, right? And we like to talk about garbage in, garbage out, and all that stuff. But the question to me is, as we move towards that open architecture, how does that imperfect data become manageable and usable in a trustworthy manner? You talked about trust for all the players of the ecosystem, right? And for me, this is a big question mark that doesn't have any obvious answers yet, especially with all the data processing tools, AI and so on, that are coming in the market very fast.
So Ellen, do you want to talk a little bit about, so you interact on both sides of the fence.
yeah.
How do you redefine the relationship between these, you know, the banks that have the customer bases, a lot of the data, and then the innovative side of the fintech? How do you bring them together in the most productive way?
Yeah, I think it's two-front, right? And first, like I mentioned earlier, it's like normalization of data and information, right? And it's almost too high of an expectation to expect every single banks and financial institution to be able to buy a data vendor and normalize all the input that you get on your own. Right, and so we spoke earlier about like layer 1, layer 2 orchestration, who has which responsibility. The truth is, like, our technologies become so complex that the ability to understand what you want to own and what you want to be really, really good at becomes important, and to then be willing to partner and outsource the remaining tasks. Right, because like nobody can actually do everything on their own anymore. Right, there's too much disruption unless you're like a massive, massive institution. It's almost impossible. So what I think needs to happen is almost like a clear normalization of who owns what journey, right? We speaks about data, they're not only a single thing. There might be shopping behavior. You've gone through 8 different flight application and everything else. I don't necessarily expect my bank to know it, but Hopper can know it. Right now, I might have this in my past financial experience. I expect my bank to know it, but not Hopper to know it. Right? So I think that differentiation of focus and emphasis of what a financial institution is going to own and be responsible for versus a fintech becomes really critical. And that's where we've seen like the most successful, I think, collaboration between fintech and banks is when both sides understand what they bring to the table, as opposed to competing on it, or a bank being too restrictive of what a fintech might want to do, or fintech being too pushy on what the bank should actually own. So, you know, I don't think any of the technology we talked about, AI or big data access or anything like that, changes the fact that there needs to be clarity of responsibility across all the parties and alignment in that. So I think that's where success can happen.
It's interesting. If I look back, the moments that I thought there were the biggest step changes was when an organization or certain parts of an organization were willing to destroy a significant part of their business and rewrite the rules. And that boldness looks
so hard.
Crazy at the time. It's so hard. Yeah. But when you look back, they look so obvious. So, Medic, I want to dig in a little bit on your side. You took a part of the industry that was populated to the nines. Everybody's doing it. Carving an advantage in the mortgage industry is, it took a little bit of imagination. Now you've done it. And maybe you can tell us, what was a big learning for you in that process, and how do you apply that going 10 years forward?
Sure. So it took, like I said, we've launched Nesto 7 years ago. We started as a digital mortgage broker, became a lender, became a servicer, then started to white label our technology to other financial institutions. One thing that I've learned is mortgage is really complex. I'm not sure I would have done it if I knew now what it was, but the complexity is the beauty. All the different steps, all the different interaction. When you talk about knowing about your customer, this is what you do, right? When you go get a mortgage, is at your will or at the mortgage, you need to open up everything to make sure that you can actually qualify. So structuring that data, making it secure and so on, and bringing transparency to the customer as they apply to this mortgage journey. So, like I said, we started as direct to consumer. We started to white label our technology. We also don't own anything on our balance sheet. We partner with every banks across Canada. So most of you are partners of us, even if you don't know it. This is what we're building as the mortgage ecosystem. So we originate direct to consumer. We acquired a company called CMLS last year. They are strong on the broker side. We do commercial multifamily. We white label our technology, and then we partner with all the capital providers to find the sweet spot credit box that they're looking for. So it took 7 years to get there, and I'm sure it will take another 10 years to make it perfect and seamless for every financial institution across Canada. I like to say that we're building that unique platform where we'll be able to provide a unified, simple mortgage experience for applying, getting underwritten, and getting service. And that should be the expectation of Canadians. By no means I want to compare ourselves to Shopify, but we try to build a platform for the mortgage industry going forward.
We have a few minutes left. I want to give you all a chance to make like a bit of a projection into the future. What do the next 5, 10, maybe a little bit longer years look like? And what are the challenges that we face? Julien, maybe let's start with you. The banks are going to face enormous transformations from open banking to this embracing of bolder data and technology and AI. Maybe if you take 30, 40 seconds each to get into, what we need to prepare for and what's the greatest opportunity.
Yeah. So I'm biased, but I would think that there's a lot in AI that represent massive opportunities, both on the service side and on optimizing back offices. Maybe since we just have a few seconds, I'll go back to a point I mentioned earlier. I do think that innovation will continue to accelerate, and our capacity to absorb it will not necessarily move that much faster, right? Capacity for humans to change is what it is. So I do think that, succeeding and gaining a competitive advantage in the next 5, 10, 15 years will depend on each company's capacity to be tech ready, learn the new technologies. Madik mentioned time when it comes to mortgage. Make that time as little as humanly as possible. And I think this is what the future is all about for the next couple of years.
Great. Thank you. Alan?
I think one of the biggest challenge for a financial institution is the fact that you have a lot of traditional infrastructure, core system, and everything else it's almost like an open heart surgery, right? Like unless you're about to have a heart attack, you're not going to replace it. Are not going to be able to change on top of the technology that like Julien talked about, right? And so how do you create a hybrid approach where you don't necessarily need to replace your heart, but then create adjacency services on top of that is going to be critical. The second thing I would mention is probably how financial institutions in general respond to this entire trend around stablecoin, right? The expectation on 24/7 money access, money movement faster, and more global, exchanges across the globe is not something we've done well traditionally, but it's going to become the expectation. And I think if banks don't lean into it, it's going to start innovating outside of the traditional financial system that we have. So I think those are the two big trends.
Yeah, great. Patrick?
Yeah, I think for me on the AI and data side, I think like with any technological transformation, there's going to be a change in the relative value of the things that we do today. I think you're currently seeing lots of these kind of shallow AI projects, which are, you know, if I have a bunch of smart interns, what could they make easier for me? But I think the real thing that we should focus on is what are the things we're doing that are unique and how can those become even more valuable? Like what's the moat, as Ellen talked about? I think that's the real thing that we need to focus. I don't know what the answer is, but I think that's the kind of key that I'm not seeing enough people looking at.
Great. Thank you. Eddie?
I think we should be looking for that magical moment to impress the customer. I think technology should be able to impress the customer to a level that I think generally financial institutions we have failed to do. I think over the last 5 years with AI, with data, with the agentic and so on, we should make that moment magical. You know, there's a few Apple products that created that feeling of magical. I think that's my mission.
Yeah.
I want to create magic.
Maybe for my part, what I talk about a lot is, you know, if we assess our week, our month, how many times have I accelerated my organization and made it easier for customers to transact and do fun things with us, as opposed to being in deceleration mode and control mode all the time. And that, I think that's you have to strike a better balance towards positivity on that. So. Cool. Thank you, all of you. That was great, and great insights. I hope you enjoyed this, and we wish you all a fantastic FinTech Forum. Thank you.
Thank you.